So a question is, can you say a few words about the fear of poverty? The fear of poverty literally destroys my heart, although in fact I have money to live on. I feel that this is not a natural state, but I don't know what to do about it. Well, I don't know if I can say a few words about the fear of poverty. I'm obviously not a man of few words, but I can certainly talk about it. And what I would say is that you're perfectly right. It's not a natural state. For me, it sounds like the person asking the question hasn't experienced poverty in this lifetime. So we're talking about the fear of poverty, not the actual experience of poverty. And for me, the only way to explain this is reincarnation. Because you look back, you can see many people, of course, live in poverty today, but you look back in the past, and it's almost impossible to have been an embodiment on this planet without having experienced severe poverty. Perhaps even poverty that caused us to die from starvation or whatever, disease or whatever it may be. So for me, the fear of poverty comes from a trauma that we experienced in a past life, an actual trauma where we experienced severe poverty that caused very severe consequences for us. And that's why we carry this over from a past life. And in the way I explain things in all of my videos, I would say that, whenever we experience a trauma, we create one of these subconscious selves in order to deal with the trauma. And I just gave a talk about the ego, about ego illusions. It's number 6. And it talks about how the ego can use anything we do to create this sense of certainty. Because there's certain situations that we don't want to experience again. So let's say you had in a past life, you experienced severe poverty. You might have died. You might have had a disease that could have prevented if you had been prevented, if you had had better nutrition, or if you had money to go to the doctor, or whatever it may be. So it's a severe trauma, and you decide, when you go out of embodiment, you decide, I never want to experience this again. So you're creating this subconscious self. And I know this is going to sound contradictory at first, but you're actually creating a subconscious self that is based on the fear of poverty. Not so much the experience, but the actual fear that this could happen. And here's how this happens with the ego. Most of the time when we experience trauma, it's because something happens that we didn't expect. We are surprised, we're shocked. And that's why the trauma, the event causes a trauma, because we are shocked by it. And it can be, in some cases, because we just didn't anticipate it. But it can also be because we thought it was unjust. So one way this could have happened was that you were, let's say, in a previous society, you were born in a rich family. You grew up thinking you were a rich person, you would be rich your whole life. And suddenly there's a revolution in your country. Could be France in the 1700s, could be the Bolshevik Revolution, whatever. Your family loses all its wealth and now you're plunged into poverty. You didn't see this coming, you didn't expect it. So this is one thing that could cause the trauma. The other thing could be that you think this is unjust. Something happened, for example, your family might have had money and someone cheated your family out of the money. So you think this was unjust, this shouldn't have happened. Perhaps you even think God should have protected you from this, whatever. There can be many different scenarios we could have experienced in past lives. So what happens is here, we didn't really expect to find ourselves in poverty, and this is what creates the trauma. So now the separate self that's created says, or is created because the conscious you says, I never want to experience this trauma again. So if you were surprised that you experienced poverty, you are saying, I never want to be surprised again by poverty. You see, there's a certain logic there. It's not really the highest form of logic that the ego is based on, but there's a certain logic. You're not even really saying, I don't want to ever experience poverty again. You're saying, I don't want to ever be surprised by poverty. And that means you are creating a self that is projecting the fear of poverty into your mind in your next lifetime. And even if you haven't experienced poverty in this lifetime, the self is constantly projecting the fear, because as long as you have the fear, you won't be surprised if you experience the actual poverty. You see the logic there? Twisted logic, but there's a certain logic to it. You can't be caught by surprise if you are fearing that something could happen. Right? And so, the only thing that you can really do about this is, I've described this in several of my breakthrough videos, several of my ego videos, several of my avatar videos, that you have to come to see the self. You have to come to see that this self, it's illogical. It's based on an illusion. And it limits you. It's actually hurting you. And then you have to come to see this, and you have to then, as the conscious you separate yourself from the self. You see that it's not really you. You have created the self, yes, but you haven't become the self. Therefore, you don't have to identify yourself with it. And when you stop identifying yourself with it, you can see that the problem that the self presents is unreal. You don't have to solve it. Now, there are many people today who are in this situation. They have experienced poverty in the past life. Now they are born in one of the more affluent parts of the world, and they go into this wanting to get material affluence. And it can never be enough for them. You can see billionaires, they have more money they could possibly spend for the rest of their lifetime. But they still don't feel secure, they don't feel safe, they don't feel it's enough. And that's because they have a subconscious self that has this fear of poverty. And therefore, no matter how many riches you have, it's not going to solve the problem. The only thing that's going to solve the problem is that you, the conscious you, comes to see the self and you let it die. The only thing, absolutely only thing. And so it may be, if it was a recent embodiment, or if it was a very severe trauma, it may be that you have some misqualified energy in your emotional body that's preventing you from seeing the self. And that's why I've talked about you can use the decrees and invocations given by the Ascended Masters to invoke high-frequency spiritual energy to transform the fear-based energy. And once you have done that, you'll be able to see the self more easily, and it won't have the same pull on your emotions. So that might be a place to start. But it really is a matter of coming to that point where you see that this is just a self. I mean, it's just unreal. Like any fear, really, is just based on an illusion in the mind. And you come to see that you can let the self die. Because why would you want to carry this self with you when you are not actually experience actual poverty? Now, I've talked about in one of my other videos how I grew up in a working class family, and we weren't really poor, but it was not in my mind that I could have lots of money and become a millionaire. So I came to a point where I had, quit my job, dedicated myself to doing the spiritual work I've been doing since 2002. And for the first year, I was really concerned about money. And then I realized, but I've actually had enough money for the past year. So why am I worrying about money? And when I made this deliberate decision to stop worrying about it, I've actually had more money than I had before. Because it's a question of what you are sending into the universe. I've talked about this in other videos, how the Earth really is a reality simulator. It's like a mirror that can only mirror back what we are projecting out. But many people make the mistake of thinking that it's only with a conscious mind they're projecting out. But in reality, we are projecting with a subconscious mind. So right now, you have the subconscious self that has the fear of poverty. And you are actually projecting into the cosmic mirror that you want to have this fear of poverty validated. You want to experience that your fear is validated. And therefore you see all kinds of signs out there, how other people lose their money, this and that. And whatever you want to have validated on earth, you can find some reason to validate it. That's what the ego and the separate selves can do. So you just have to come to that point where you realize you are projecting that you want to fear poverty. And the mirror is reflecting back to give you that experience where you think you have to fear poverty. That's what I said. I was projecting that I didn't have enough money, and I realized I'm actually projecting that the experience I want to have is that I don't have enough money, or at least I fear I won't have enough. And when I saw that self and let it die, it just faded away. And it's the same thing with you. You can come to see that self that holds that fear of poverty and say, I don't want it validated anymore. And the only way out of that is to let the self die. Why? Because, and this is another thing that people make mistakes about, as I said in my video about the law of attraction, you think that by doing something with the conscious mind, you can get the cosmic mirror to send something else back to you. But you're still projecting a different message with the subconscious mind. So the mirror responds to that. And so the only way, to overcome the fear of poverty is to see it as a self, let the self die. Because you can't expect that the universe is going to respond while you're still sending out subconsciously this message that you want your fear of poverty to be validated. So that's really the only way you're going to be free of this. Come to see it and consciously say, I don't want to live this way anymore. I don't want to drag this self with me.